There certainly has been a lot of controversy surrounding Angelina Jolie and her decision to have her breasts removed due to a BRCA gene defect.
It's been everywhere in the news. It's been in the New York Times. It's been in People magazine. Everybody's talking about it.
Yes, and some of the controversy has been about the timing of Angelina's announcement in the New York Times. By Angelina Jolie coming out with the news of her BRCA gene mutation and her decision to get a bilateral mastectomy without a diagnosis of cancer, and using the word choice at the same time as the upcoming human gene patent renewal, has political and financial implications.
And they're pretty serious, too. I mean, when you look at an actress, first of all, or an actor, taking center stage on a medical issue, it's not the smartest thing to do.
Well, you kind of have to feel bad for her. I mean,
Indeed.
she has this gene mutation.
But she's setting
Her
the
mother-
example
her-
now for a lot of
I know,
people
but
to
I
follow.
just but I just want to explain that her mother had it too, and her mother died at 56
Sure.
from ovarian cancer, which you also get from this particular type of a gene mutation.
Sure.
And so she didn't want to get breast cancer. She's only 37. She has 6 children.
Yeah,
You
that's
can't
all
blame her for not wanting to make a
Totally
decision.
understandable. But what I can blame her for, and blame the press for, is making this an article that has gotten national and international prominence. Angelina Jolie is a terrific actress and a humanitarian. She is not an expert in breast cancer and in the BRCA gene.
Well, she
I'll-
was probably scared.
Well, I would
know.
think so, and I'm sure she had good medical consultations that got her a lot of information.
And so, what are the statistics? What did the doctor tell her?
Well, he probably told her that her chances of getting breast cancer by the time she was 80 or 90 years old would be in the range of 80 to 90%, and that probably scared her a lot. And I doubt that the doctor said much about other approaches that could be taken.
And they told her now that she's had the mastectomy that it reduces her chances to 5%.
Sure. Well,
So-
that should have had a lot to do with her making that decision. But the problem is that really the best thing to do?
Well, and in mainstream medicine, they don't tout alternatives, and the media doesn't bring them up either. So maybe we should let's first start out by talking about what the BRCA gene is and why this is
Okay.
serious.
Okay. These are genes that you want to have and have them in good shape. When those genes are mutated, and there are hundreds and hundreds of different mutations, by the way, when you have that defect, then you cannot repair DNA, okay, like you should, because it's DNA defects that often lead to the development of cancer. So when you have this BRCA gene defect, it tells you a lot.
So who should have this test done?
Well, I think if you have a problem with a family history of a BRCA gene, that certainly would be one thing. If someone in your family just had breast cancer or had ovarian cancer, because we know that the risk for developing those two cancers are quite high in that situation, you might think about it. But the total number of people who are influenced by BRCA gene and cancer is remarkably small. It's probably in the order of 1 person in 1,000.
Okay, so this gene is hereditary.
Yeah.
The mutation of this gene is hereditary.
Yes.
So if your parents, like you said, if your parents have cancer, it might be a good idea to check and see if you have this gene so
Sure.
that then you can make some choices in your life. But having a bilateral mastectomy isn't the only choice, or having your ovaries removed isn't the only choice. I mean, how far do you go? Because there could be other cancers. You might get brain cancer, you don't want to cut off your head.
Yeah. Well, that's right. Okay.
So you have to. Well, you don't have to.
Well, there
but
are
we would
problems.
suggest that you look at some alternatives.
Yeah, but there are problems with this test. I mean, first of all, only one company has the test because they have a patent on the gene, okay? And they own that gene. So they own you from that point of view. And they extort you because it costs $3,000 to $4,000 to have the test done. A lot of insurances don't cover it. And so you would be out of pocket there. Now, some people should have the test, but if 1 in 1,000 people are going to be involved with a cancer like that that's going to influence them, you're not going to have those other 999 people do a $3,000 or $4,000 test to screen for cancer.
Well, I thought it was interesting also that it just came out that the Affordable Care Act is
Okay.
going to cover the BRCA gene test.
The cost,
that
yeah.
costs the $3,000 to $4,000, and I don't know. There's something about that kind of bothers me a bit because
Well,
of this connection with big corporations and the
Well,
government
big
and
business and the corruption that's there has a big influence on what Congress does and what the Supreme Court will do. I mean,
because if insurance covers it, that's a lot of money for that gene company.
oh, you're looking at the possibility of trillions of dollars actually being spent over a period of 10 years or so.
And already, just since this news came out about Angelina, the stocks have gone up. And we also found out that Angelina has stock in Myriad Genetics.
Right. So this is a worrisome situation that's very problematic. I don't think that we want to try and get women to be following the story and taking it seriously because it's not that common of a problem. The genetic defects that cause cancer from BRCA genes is probably in the range of 5%, and there are many other defects that can cause cancer to develop in women as well. So we need to take a hard look at this before we start recommending mastectomies. That's a very
Yes.
personal decision, and I can't criticize Angelina for having that. That's her decision, and that's I respect that. But I'm very concerned that she's setting a precedent for a lot of women to be thinking about doing that if they have this defect, rather than looking at approaches that are would keep you from getting that gene to express itself.
So let's talk about how important epigenetics is if you have a BRCA gene defect.
Yeah, this is a huge thing. You look at the work of Bruce Lipton, and I suggest his book, The Biology of Belief, to everybody, because it's changed the paradigm of what DNA means. DNA and genes are important as blueprints that give us an expectation of what we're at risk for. But look at it this way. 100 years ago, we still had BRCA gene defects all over the place, but there wasn't much in the way of breast cancer. Now, 100 years later, those genes that are inherited, that are defective and don't protect against DNA breaks that can cause cancer, are exposed by environmental factors. Things like your lifestyle, environmental pollutants, how much sleep you get, your stress level, what you eat, how much exercise you get, how you detoxify, what you weigh. All these things factor into it and need to be paid attention to.
And the xenoestrogens that we have a lot of in our environment
Oh,
that
we're
are in
exposed to
plastics and so
plastic,
forth.
right, and petroleum products that will lead to developing high levels of powerful estrogens that can trigger those genes to be more active and express themselves in the form of cancer.
Okay, so let's talk about things that women can do if they were so unfortunate as to have the BRCA gene defect. Actually, some of these things would be healthy to do anyway, just to prevent cancer. That are alternatives that the media doesn't talk about and that you don't usually hear about from your mainstream doctor.
Right. So there are a lot of preventive things we can do. It's first the lifestyle things for sure. They can make a huge difference in whether or not something's triggered. I mean, the studies that Dean Ornish did on men who have prostate cancer certainly proved that. When he looked at 300 men who had prostate cancer and biopsied them all and looked at their 500 oncogenes, he found that they were mostly turned on, and maybe why they had cancer. But in half of them, he did nothing to and rebiopsied them in 3 months and found that those genes were still turned on because they didn't do anything different. But in the other half, they did a lot. They did lifestyle things that were different. They did yoga, relaxation, exercise, stress reduction, and those 500 oncogenes were mostly turned off. So the power of those kinds of things are enormous.
Well, our diet is very important. Like high lignin organic flaxseed oil is especially important. So why is that important?
Well, see, what flaxseed oil lignans have in it are estrogens that are weak estrogens. And you think, well, why would you want to give estrogen to somebody? Because it'll just increase their levels and cause a problem with a higher risk for breast cancer. But these weak estrogens take the receptor sites up in the body, and when they do that, they block estradiol, which is far more powerful than the plant estrogens, and will keep the powerful estrogens from getting it. So they actually lower the effectiveness of these estrogens at causing cancer.
And then also there are other tests besides mammograms. The media was writing up after Angelina was diagnosed with this breast cancer, or not breast cancer, but with the BRCA gene. She didn't have breast cancer.
Right, she doesn't have it.
But they were suggesting that women check themselves by getting frequent mammograms, particularly if they have this BRCA gene defect. And our opinion is that it's just the opposite.
Well, it's stupid. I would say it's stupid. Why would you want to do a test that gives ionizing radiation that's going to trigger those BRCA genes into being active? We know from studies that were published a few years ago that if you give one chest x-ray to women under the age of 20 who have the BRCA gene defect and compare them to women who have not had a chest x-ray before the age of 20, that their risk of developing breast cancer is up 250%. That is notable. So we have something here that needs to be changed in terms of how we follow it.
Is very concentrated into that particular area. Yeah. So if you've listened to any of our other shows, you know that we recommend breast thermography because there's no radiation with that, and yet you barely hear anything about it in mainstream or in the media.
It's the silliest thing of all time because a breast thermogram is a very active test, a very accurate test that looks at how even in women with fibrocystic breasts, where cancer is the most difficult to diagnose or to find, this technology looks at the physiology of what's happening in the breast and enables you to get a fingerprint of what that thermal pattern is like and follow it over time and see if it changes. So in women who have this BRCA gene defect, you could follow with a breast thermogram even every 6 months. It's a test that's about $200 or less that is very accurate in following and not diagnosing, but finding changes that are suspicious that could lead you to do additional studies like the MRI test that can give you more specific information about it.
And maybe even ultrasound.
Sure. But see, the MRI is a decent test, but it's expensive and it overdiagnoses things. It's a little too sensitive. The ultrasound really isn't sensitive enough. The mammogram causes cancer. So what we're left with here is looking at breast thermography and bringing that forward, particularly for women who are at high risk of developing breast cancer.
Okay, and also for these women, it's suggested to follow your hormone levels. You want to make sure you don't have too much estrogen, for one thing.
Sure. When you're exposed to all these xenoestrogens, these environmental estrogens that we take in with our food or inhale or on our skin, the petroleum products and plastics and pesticides that we're exposed to, when they make those levels of estrogen go up, you're at a higher risk for developing breast cancer. So we should be looking at that as well in women who have the BRCA gene defect.
And then, of course, there's vitamin D.
Huge thing. When we look at vitamin D, we know that the risk for developing breast cancer is substantially higher if it's low. Same thing with prostate cancer, colon cancer, and other cancers. And in the wintertime, our levels generally drop, and there's an epidemic of vitamin D deficiency. If you wanted to cut back on cut back on the incidence of breast cancer, vitamin D would be one of the first things you do.
Well, another vitamin that's really helpful for this is vitamin C.
Sure.
Also,
it protects against the effects of ionizing radiation. You can actually block the death of animals if you pre-treat them with vitamin C if you give them lethal doses of radiation. So that would be something I would suggest, eating foods that are high in vitamin C and maybe supplementing in this case if you have that BRCA gene defect, because it will help protect against that.
Well, also eating lots of fresh fruits and vegetables and
Maybe
if possible to juice.
Sure.
When we say juice, we're not talking orange juice.
Right.
We're talking like fresh, raw, organic vegetables and juicing those.
Right. You can juice up to 15 pounds a day of vegetables and only get about 8-ounce glasses of juice.
So it's
that
very
would be
concentrated that way.
So if not most people don't need to do that, but if you have the BRCA gene defect, that's going to protect you from developing the expression of cancer because of DNA mutations.
And also cruciferous vegetables that contain the indole-3 carbinol. Things like broccoli and cabbage and Brussels sprouts and kale.
Right.
Some of those vegetables.
Right. Control your weight. Make sure you're not overweight. Make sure you're exercising on a regular basis. All these things do a lot to change the effects, the epigenetic effects that predispose to the activation of these defective genes.
And pomegranate and basil, and those taste good.
Yeah,
Boy.
sure.
Pesto and
lifestyle is just huge here. And maybe that's something that a lot of women would choose over doing a mastectomy that's so disfiguring and leads to so many potential problems as well.
Yeah, and we really wish Angelina well and hope that she's made the right decision
Indeed.
for her and for her family.
Yeah, well, it's a shame that it's come to this. I mean, it's nice to know that Angelina has made a choice for herself that's right for her and her family. I think it's something that should have a low profile in the news media, however, because it's setting a trend for women to be thinking in terms of I need to have that test when they really don't need to, and it's setting the trend to be thinking more about mastectomy when that's not the only choice. So we should be seeing doctors who are well informed with the alternatives to surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation for cancer.